Chapter 1, 1.1 On the Eve of Islam. Towards the middle of the 6th century CE, the world had grown dark and ugly with superstitions which were clogging its spiritual life. Greed and tyranny had warped its moral being, and oppression had stifled the majority of its people. People who had once been free and productive, the oldest civilizations in the world, the Assyrians, the Phoenicians, and the Egyptians, lay writhing under the paw of the Roman wolf, while the Babylonians, suffering from equally tyrannical Persian dominion, were only allowed a bare subsistence, while all the wealth of their land, the fertile land between the two rivers, went to fill the coffers of the Persian emperors and their vassals. In the Roman Empire, the privileged, who owned many slaves, were immensely rich and exempted from taxes, while the native inhabitants of the lands they dominated had to carry all the burdens of taxation. They were overtaxed both financially and physically. In India, people fared no better. There was a cruel caste system that divided people into 4 classes. The Brahmins had all the privileges, and the untouchables all the sufferings and humiliations. The Arabs, whose land was situated between the Persian and the Roman empires, were in a deplorable state. Their border tribes were often under Persian or Roman rule, and the whole land lived in fear of invasion by the Roman Empire or one of its powerful warlords. Their religion, after having been the purest monotheism, the religion of the patriarch Ibrahim a.s., had been corrupted by generation after generation of associations with other peoples, with the Sabaeans who worshipped the stars, or the Persians who worshipped fire, as well as people who held other strange beliefs with which the world at that time was replete. They made offerings to stone idols and buried their baby daughters alive. The Romans were Christians who considered themselves the masters of the world and wanted all the peoples under their dominion to follow their particular brand of Christianity. When the Copts of Egypt would not follow them but adhered to their own beliefs, which differed slightly in dogma from the Romans inflicted terrible punishments on them, cutting off their hands and feet and meting out slow death by melting them on candles because they would not give up their Monophysite Christianity. Throughout history, when man had forgotten the noble source of his inner life and looked greedily towards the world and its wealth, a messenger was sent by Allah to show him the way he had lost or remind him of the precepts he had forgotten or neglected. But for a long time, no sign or word from Allah had been heard. That age saw the lowest point that human thought and activities had so far descended to, the worst that man had ever become. Before this, messengers had come in regular succession, but for 600 years no message had come from on high, no ray of hope or mercy touched the earth from the source of all hope and mercy. There was absolute silence. In that cruel and corrupt age, women, children and slaves had few rights in principle and even less in practice. They lived in pain and despair day after day, until one day Allah took pity upon their plight and sent the greatest of all prophets, a messenger who used to pray, Thou art the Lord of the downtrodden, and Thou art my Lord. A noble and glorious light permeated the heavens from east to west, from the confines of China to the shores of Morocco, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. An arc of light encompassed the world, a light that brought justice and knowledge to mankind, for it was a light that descended through the mercy of the Most Merciful. Allah tells his chosen prophet in the Quran, And we have not sent you except out of mercy to mankind. But softly let us begin the noble story from the beginning. Chapter 2, 2.1 Abdullah, the Prophet, peace be upon him's father. Abdul Muttalib had almost everything. He had health, wealth and power, and was respected by his tribe, but he had one source of sadness. He had only one son. At a time when the Arabs prided themselves on their numerous offspring, he had just one child, and he needed many, many sons to help him in the noble office he had been entrusted with. This office was to provide the pilgrims who came to visit the Kaaba every year with water to drink. It was an honorary office, but it meant much to him. Over the honorary offices concerning the maintenance of the ancient house and catering to its pilgrims, so many struggles had taken place, and so many pacts and covenants had been made. Abdul Muttalib vowed that, if he should have 10 sons and they all reached manhood, he would sacrifice one of them to the gods of the Kaaba. The years went by. Abdul Muttalib became head of his tribe, revered and obeyed by all, and he had 11 sons. He realized that he should fulfill his earlier vow to the gods of the Kaaba, but which of his dearly beloved sons should he sacrifice? All were dear to him, particularly Abdullah, the youngest, who had grown up to be a very fine young man, the handsomest that Quraysh could boast of. Abdul Muttalib decided to draw lots, for he could not part willingly with any of them. The name of Abdullah came out, Abdullah the youngest and the one closest to his heart. Abdul Muttalib felt himself bound to fulfill his vow no matter how painful it would be to him, but all the people of Quraysh protested. Would he sacrifice a young man of such great promise, the pride and joy of Quraysh? Abdul Muttalib did not know how to extricate himself from this terrible vow. Then some of the wise men in Mecca counselled him to consult a renowned soothsayer in At-Taif. Abdul Muttalib went to see her with a group of the nobles of Mecca. She asked them what the ransom of a man in their land was, and they answered that it was 10 camels. She told them to draw lots, these lots were drawn by the priests of their gods, between the name of Abdullah and 10 camels. If the name of Abdullah came out again, they were to increase the number of camels each time by 10 until the gods were appeased. In hope and fear, Abdul Muttalib returned to Mecca. He went to the Kaaba where they kept the arrows for drawing lots and asked to have lots drawn between Abdullah and 10 camels. 10 times in succession did the name of Abdullah appear, and each time Abdul Muttalib increased the number of camels by 10 until they became 100 camels. The 10th time the arrow of the camels appeared, and not Abdullah's name. To make sure that the gods were truly appeased, Abdul Muttalib drew lots 3 more times, and each time it was the camel's arrow that appeared. Thus he was satisfied that he was exonerated from his terrible vow, and now he could keep his beloved young son. When Abdullah reached 24 years of age, his father decided it was time for him to get married, so he chose for him Amina, the daughter of the chief of Banu Zuhra, a bride worthy of being the wife of the son of the head of Quraysh and ruler of all Mecca. After the wedding, Abdullah remained with his bride for 3 days in her father's house, according to the custom of the Arabs. Then he took her to his own home among the houses of Banu Abdul Muttalib. The Meccans built their houses according to their rank. The higher the rank, the closer the house was to the Kaaba. The houses of Banu Abdul Muttalib were the closest to the ancient house, for they were the most noble of Quraysh and gave precedence to no one. Those of lesser rank had houses further removed from the Kaaba, while slaves and clients had houses still further off. People of ill repute had houses very far removed from the Kaaba on the outskirts of the city. Abdullah did not remain long with his bride, but left to go on a trading expedition to Gaza in the north, as most ambitious young men did. The Meccans lived chiefly by trade and had 2 annual journeys, one in the summer and another in the winter. The summer journey took their merchandise northwards to Ash-Sham, modern Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the winter journey took their merchandise southwards to the Yemen. Mecca formed the meeting point between east and west, the link between the Roman Empire and merchandise coming from India and China. On his way back from the summer journey, Abdullah stopped at Yathrib, Medina, to visit his maternal uncles, Banu Najjar. There he fell ill, and the caravan had to leave without him. On its return to Mecca, they reported his illness to his father, who sent his elder brother, Al-Harith, to bring him back. Arriving in Yathrib, Al-Harith found that Abdullah had died 1 month after the caravan had left, and had been buried there. Al-Harith returned to bring the tragic news to his aged father and the waiting bride. Amina was with child, a child that would never see its father's face. 2.2. The Year of the Elephant. Abdul Muttalib had his private grief, but a general grief was soon to befall all Mecca, because from the south a great army was approaching it. It was led by Abraha, the Abyssinian, who with his troops had travelled hundreds of miles in order to pull down the ancient house. Abraha had invaded Yemen and subjugated its fierce highland people to his rule. On this expedition, however, he was not interested in the land, for it was mostly desert, but only in one spot, Mecca, and one place, the Kaaba. The ancient house of Ibrahim and Ismail, alayhim salam, had great repute among the Arabs. They travelled hundreds of miles from remote parts of the peninsula to visit it. Simple and austere, it had a strange spiritual beauty that drew men towards it. The church Abraha had built at great cost, using the finest marble, gold and ivory, could not compete with it, and therefore the ancient house had to be pulled down. When the Arabs heard of this, the 2 tribes, together with volunteers from other tribes, tried to block his way, but were defeated. Against Abraha's great army, his war elephants and javelin throwers, they did not stand a chance. Abraha travelled on towards Mecca using an Arab captive as a guide. As he approached Mecca, the Meccans rose to fight for their beloved Kaaba, the first house built on earth for the worship of Allah, but they soon learnt that they were no match for Abraha and his great host of trained soldiers with their war elephants. Abraha sent a messenger to Abdul Muttalib, the ruler of Mecca, saying that he had not come to fight them, but only to pull down the ancient house. If they offered him no resistance, he would spare their lives. Abdul Muttalib, with a delegation of Meccans, went to see Abraha, hoping that through negotiations they would be able to save the ancient house. Abraha, impressed by the dignity and distinguished air of Abdul Muttalib, offered to return the latter's camels that his soldiers had taken, but he would not hear of his request that the Kaaba be spared. Abdul Muttalib and the delegation offered to give him 1/3 of the wealth of the Tihama region, but Abraha refused. He had come from far richer lands and was not interested in taking money and returning. He had come down to pull down the ancient house. This house had a strange attraction to men, and so long as it remained, his church did not have a chance of stirring their hearts. Exhausted and with a heavy heart, Abdul Muttalib returned to tell the people of Mecca that all was lost, and to flee for their lives to the mountain heights. When questioned what would become of the ancient house, he said, "The Kaaba has Allah to protect it." After seeing the women and children conveyed to the safety of the mountains, Abdul Muttalib took the men and went to pray by the ancient house for the last time. They prayed with intense fervour, begging Allah to protect his house. Abdul Muttalib kept clinging to the door of the Kaaba and praying until the last moment. Abraha directed his great lead elephant towards Mecca. It would have been able to break down the walls of the Kaaba in no time. The elephant walked until it reached the boundaries of the sacred city and then stopped as if turned into stone. Abraha and his soldiers did all they could to make it move, but it would not budge, so they directed it towards Ash-Sham. The elephant now began to move, so they directed it toward the Kaaba again, and again the elephant became like a granite boulder. Suddenly in the sky there appeared birds in large numbers. Great flocks of birds covered the horizons like enormous black clouds. They swooped down upon Abraha and his men, and kept pelting them with small sharp stones until many were stoned to death. Only a few were able to flee. After the birds had done their work, Abraha and the remnants of his crushed army headed back towards Yemen, where he died of shock and exhaustion. Years later, these holy verses from the Quran were to remind the Meccans, many of whom were old enough to remember, of the incident. Have you not seen what your Lord did to the people of the elephant? Did he not make their cunning go astray, and set upon them birds in great hordes, to pelt them with stones of hard mud, making them like eaten-up leaves? Chapter 105, verses 1-5. They are both a warning that those who oppose Allah will come to grief, and a reminder of the goodness of Allah to them in how he saved the ancient house for them when they stood unable to do anything. After this miraculous incident, the fame of the Kaaba spread wider, its attraction increased, and the Arabs came from all parts of the peninsula to visit the sacred house. The total rout of the army that had come to destroy it served only to enhance its sanctity. It was the year 570 CE, and of such tremendous importance to the Arabs that they called it the Year of the Elephant.